a way of covering up certain information from your opponent about what you are doing with the racket, what kind of stroke you're playing, what's happening to the ball, right? And what we see with the development of auditory stimulus, we're talking, guys, so just come in quietly and sit down. Auditory development is very rapid, so when we're born, infants get enough information to be able to turn their head in a direction if there's a sound, right? Particularly if that sound is close by, the further away the sound is, the less likely they are to turn towards it. And by 3 years old, so not very long, they're able to determine and distinguish and recognize sounds that are at a long distance. Right? So, if we're lucky, during adulthood, we keep our hearing, we don't struggle with getting those cues, brain learns to recognize. So for example, think about if you're cooking something, say you're frying some bacon or something like that in the kitchen, and you leave the kitchen. But you can tell from the sound, if you're keeping an ear open, right? If I'm paying attention to the bacon, I can tell from the sound how much the bacon is cooked and whether I need to go back to the kitchen, right? I don't have to wait for the bacon to burn and smell something if I'm actually paying attention to those auditory cues that I'm getting from the bacon. Right? We don't always, but we can. We're able to if we choose to pay attention. Okay? So, as we get older, when we look at older adults, even once we get into our 50s and 60s, you start to get a few more problems hearing things, particularly that idea of figure ground. So if I'm in a room where there's a lot of noise, distinguishing something particular in amongst the rest of that noise gets trickier and trickier as we get older. So that maybe is important when we're looking at what's the impact on driving. What auditory cues do I pay attention to when I'm driving? That maybe if I've got the radio on in the car, as I get older, I start to miss certain cues and make some errors of judgment in driving. So the sound of the wheels on the surface of the road, right? If you drive a manual car, the sound of the engine gives you some warning about whether or not you should change gear and how quickly you'll be able to stop or pull away under certain circumstances, right? If I drive with the window down, do I hear a train coming even though the gate isn't coming down on? I thought that was funny. Oh my God! Jeez, guys, give me a break. All right, so.
Say it again,
Whatever. Okay, so as we get older, then probably what is going on is that again that idea of the quality of information deteriorates. For a couple of reasons, either just because over time we see some degradation in the organ or in the neural transmission of the stimulus from the organ to the brain, but also the one I wanted you to be paying attention to is that we're starting to see research that some loss of hearing can occur from exposure to environmental noise. So for example, people who work with pneumatic drills all the time now are required to wear those great big noise-reducing headsets. They didn't used to be until we made the link that many of these individuals were suffering hearing loss later on in life. There's also, for you guys, might be a little more relevant, quite a lot of research out there now on iPods. Right? So people who wear earphones and turn their iPod up really, really loud, there's some indication that they could be doing some damage to their hearing over time. One of the outcomes of that piece of research is that some manufacturers build in an upper loudness that you can make your earphones go to, right? Because they don't want you coming back and suing them later on because you could turn the sound up as loud as you like on your iPod and there's no filtering going on in the earphone. Right? So some manufacturers now build in, it doesn't matter how, once you hit the limit on the earphone, doesn't matter how much louder you try to turn up your iPod, it won't go up any higher. Right? So just, you want to pay attention to some of these ideas. People often think that, as I say, that we don't really, hearing is not as important as seeing, right? And humans are very, very dominant visual processors. We use our vision a lot. But here's something to think about. I've always thought, and I probably do still think this, but I've always thought if I was going to lose one or the other, if I got to choose, I would prefer to be deaf than blind because I love watching the birds in the garden. I love watching the sunrise. I love watching the sunset. I think that I would find that really difficult not to have that experience. And so I think I would choose being deaf over being blind. But when you talk to people who work with the Special Olympics, for example, they say that it is actually much harder to move around, to skillfully reproduce movement, to function in our world for deaf people than it is for blind people. So that's an interesting thought.
We use it hard for deaf people.
Yeah. Yeah, people who work with Special Olympians, with disabled people, say that it's much harder for deaf people to function and move efficiently than it is for blind people. And that as a community, as a society, we are better set up for a blind person to be able to maneuver around and go shopping and be somewhat self-sufficient than we are for deaf people, which is an interesting idea. I don't know because I've not worked with those two populations, but that's what they say. So, all right, and then just be thinking, I don't want you to look at that internodal section, but just be aware of the fact that obviously at any one time your brain is getting bombarded with all this sensory information. And it doesn't only pay attention to one type. It does tend to prefer vision if we have it, but your brain organizes all that information to give you a big picture of what is happening, right? So if I move, what's the outcome of moving? What do I feel? What do I see? What do I hear? And your brain takes all that feedback in order to tweak the attempt at the skill the next time around. All right? Okay. Questions? All right. So, then we're going to skip to to the next chapter. And has everybody got a bit of paper? All right, so 3 questions, same idea. All right, so the development of which 2 domains, so which 2 things, appear to be strongly linked now? Given the more recent research, the development of which 2 domains now appear to be very strongly linked together? Guys, don't want to hear any talking, please. All right, which 2 domains now appear to be strongly linked together when we look at the research? All right, question 2 is the actions or behaviors, my opportunities to move that are provided by the environment are called what? What's the term that we use for the actions or behaviors that are provided by the environment? What's the opportunity the environment gives me to move? Bless you. Third one, for older adults, strength programs can reduce the risk for what? For older adults, strength programs can reduce the risk for what? Put your name on it. We'll switch
I can't remember that.
All right, everybody got someone else's sheet? Okay, so the first one is a half point for each item, okay? So development of motor, so motor development and cognitive development now appear to be strongly linked. Right? So we don't think anymore that they develop separately from each other.
Motor and cognitive?
Motor, half a point, cognitive, half a point. Actions and behaviors provided by the environment, so my opportunities to move that are provided by the environment are called affordances. Affordances. But it doesn't matter if it's not spelled right. Or if they put afford rather than affordances, that would be okay. Right, and then the third one, for older adults, strength programs can reduce the risk for falls.
Yes.
Strength programs can reduce the risk for falls. Okay, so total that out 3.
Everybody give me that.
Half. Okay, this here. Okay.
This is our chapter, miss?
Huh?
Yes, we're gonna let-
11, yeah. systems, how that information that we get, that we receive, yes,
This chapter 11, right?
yes. How does that information that we receive impact the movement that we're able to do? We're going to look at it slightly the other way around, because what we think is that movement is important to the development of perception. So it's a difficult research question to ask, because in order to really test what we think, we would have to take two very similar groups of people or babies, and we would have to stop one group from moving and allow the other group to move, and then test them down the line and see the differences in their perceptions. So that's not obviously an ethical thing to do. So we can't really test it in humans easily, right? We're getting more sophisticated equipment. We've mentioned that before. We're able to look at MRIs. We're able to look at PET scans. So researchers are finding ways of using those pieces of equipment to try to look at what changes when the person starts to move. Right? And the idea is that in order to link my perception to a definite movement, to something that's purposeful, I would have to do the movement first. Like, I've got to get the experience of the movement to put the perception that I got and the movement together. All right, so I can repeat it again another time. Don't worry about historical. So we know perceptual motor activities are important, right? So if I am on the playground, and so today the children were really struggling with the high hurdle on the obstacle course, because they were being very stubborn about trying to go over that high hurdle when there was another opportunity right there in front of them, but they weren't perceiving that yet, but they could have gone under, right? So combining perceptual concepts with movement is a good way for the brain to try to learn that, right? And it gives them experience, practice at performing motor skills that require perceptual information. So I didn't get over to catching today. I don't know how well that was going. Right? Catching requires a lot of perceptual information. And we can reinforce concepts, shapes, directions. Moving is a very easy way of reinforcing some cognitive ideas, spatial ideas that contribute to positive outlook and self-esteem. So if I can move more efficiently, I feel better about going out and moving. I think Will is snoozed. Couldn't tell where that came from. It's in my hearing. Couldn't tell where that came from. Will, I think, is, I don't know, William's an interesting character because he has very weak legs and his motor skills are actually quite poor, but he's always been pretty confident out on the playground because he thinks he's good. And I'm starting to see that change a little bit, which will be a problem, I think, for him if we can't keep him motivated, because he's starting to be able to make the comparison, and maybe he's starting to feel less confident. That'll be a problem, because then he'll start not doing things, right? So it's important that we find something that he can feel confident about within the moving. We can design lessons specifically to concentrate on a particular perceptual aspect. So I can do something for typical children or for a special needs child that is specific. So if they've got to be able to track something in order to improve their reading, can we include something where they would have to track an item, right, side to side? So as I say, what we think is that now we've got this really tightly connected development between our motor skills and our cognitive skills. And part of how we're getting to that answer is these MRIs and PET scans are giving us tons of information. So there are areas of the brain that are involved with making a plan, right? So that would be a cognitive area, a cognitive action, making a plan. But it interacts, it talks directly to an area of the brain that is making decisions about a movement choice. So those two talk directly, we're able to see now. So why would they be able to talk directly if they weren't interacting with each other? There would have been no reason for those synapses, those wiring systems to have been formed. Let's see. We've got physical activity triggers activity in the brain that facilitates learning of other skills, particularly in acute phase. So when we look a bit later at adults, if I exercise, after the exercise, I'm able to retain information and learn new information better than I was without the exercise. Now that it's not a chronic effect, I have to keep exercising, but we're also seeing that with children. If you're a PE teacher or a parent, we're starting to see a lot of literature on, well, if we get rid of PE and we get rid of recess, when we know these things improve learning, right? And sitting still, gradually learning goes away because we get bored or we get hungry or whatever, right? So why would we take recess away when the literature would say the class after recess, the kids would pay much better attention and learn that material more effectively? Right? So that's a big argument right now in the PE and school world. The cerebellum, right, is important for postural control, for keeping those postural muscles turned on slightly, depending, so when you're sitting here, they're all turned on, and the cerebellum plays a role in that. But it's also linked to the development of memories and emotional responses to ideas. We see brain proteins. So there are proteins that work in the brain to maintain the neural structure in the brain or to build new connections in the brain. So I have to have protein to build something, right? So if I've got brain proteins available to build a connection because I'm learning a new skill, then that makes learning simpler. And brain proteins go up when we exercise a lot. So that's an important, the more we exercise, the higher levels of brain proteins we see. Also particular hormones that work with the brain proteins to help growth in the brain, right? Those increase in the circulation when we exercise and stimulate capillary growth in the brain. So the more blood flow to the brain, the more oxygen the brain is getting, the more nutrients the brain is getting, and the better able we are to learn, or the healthier we can keep the brain. And maybe be better able to maintain memory and not have memory issues as we get older. Right? So lots of positive things occur in the brain when we move that we're starting to find out just because we've got this access to this more sophisticated equipment now.
So Ms., why do people get Bell palsy?
Sorry?
Why do people get Bell palsy?
Why do people get,
Bell palsy.
oh, Bell palsy?
Yeah.
I do not know the answer.
Wait, what is Bell palsy?
They have your face is shut down.
Where part of the face, the muscles in the face kind of go into a permanent.
Damn, it's not that you had that to everything.
They
I'm sorry, I know, I try.
They say it's like a seizure while you're sleeping and
It probably is connected to some kind of stroke in an area of the brain that controls those muscles, would be my guess, but I don't know anything about that. All right, so if we know the baby is able to get information from sensory organs, then it's possible that initially perception of things, perception of objects, or perception of somebody moving across the room develops before we're able to actually control organized movement or voluntary control. And then once we start moving voluntarily, then that perceptual information guides us, teases us, encourages us to continue to move further. And then when I move, I get a different set of perceptual information, and that helps me refine the original perception, so we learn more about 3 dimensions, and we'll look at something in just a minute about behind things. How do I know there are things behind something?
Dr. Wall? Is like perception, is it found different like in like athletes, children? Is it different from just like a normal person, or do they both like start at the same level and develop depending
Develop
on
differently. If all the organs are fully developed healthily,
in both?
then I think what you would see is it's the experiences that the brain gets that changes how those signals are interpreted and the perceptions that the different children have. Because even if you look at identical twins, their perceptions are slightly different of things.
Okay.
So your own personal experiences drive your perception of, so it could be a movement skill, or it could be, you know, if you ever have those arguments with your parents or with your partner that this happened this way on this day, and they go, absolutely not, it didn't happen like that, it happened like this. And you end up having this big disagreement because two people's perception of the same thing is very different. Whether it's an emotional, whether it's a color, right? A student came into my office today and wanted some work, and I said, oh, it's in that crate. And he said, oh, the orange one. I mean, the yellow one. Well, I would stake my life that this crate is orange. Right? But two people's perceptions of anything are different. And that's an important concept when you're teaching, I think, because my perception of what I expect to happen or what I can use this item for might be different to someone else's.
So what, like, tools can you use to like really develop that at a young age?
Just keep giving as much experience as possible. I mean, if you give them bubble wrap and you give them cardboard and you give them that, the stuff that Ms. Gard brought for us to play with, that gooey, yeah, Play-Doh would be good, right? So give them lots of different experiences. So I said that it's difficult to do this with children, right? We can't stop a group of children from moving, but they did do some work where they stopped a group of kittens from moving. So if you have a look on page 241, there's a diagram of the setup, and they've done more work using this setup, but now we're kind of switching in the research world over to using brain imaging so that we can actually see humans. But this was a really interesting study. So they took newborn kittens and they put one kitten into a harness in a carousel. So it's like in a big drum. And they put one kitten in a harness and attached it to the arms. And they put the other kitten into a carriage and attached it to the arms. And then they made the kitten that was just in the harness walk round and round and round and round and round in circles. Okay? So the other kitten is going round and round and round in circles. It's getting exactly the same visual information because they're both going round and round and round inside the drum. But one of them is walking and one of them is riding. Right? That was the only difference. And so what they found was that when they took the kittens out of this contraption and started testing them, so they did this work for a few weeks, or I don't know the developmental trend for kittens, but however long they kept them in this drum, right? When they took them out of the drum, what they found was that the kitten that had been on the cart, had been being carried, not moving, had lower scores on depth perception than the kitten that was doing the walking. So the connection between the walking action and the visual information made a difference to that kitten's development of depth perception. The kitten that was sitting still got the visual information, but it wasn't able to make the connection to the moving. Also, of course, since it hadn't been practicing walking, its walking was very delayed. So, and then a little more recently, at least by my standards, maybe not for you guys, but a little more recently, they've looked at baby walkers. So those big plastic trays on wheels, and you sit the baby in the harness and the baby can move itself around, even though it can't stand or walk on its own yet. With the support of the baby walker, it can self-locomote, so it can move around. And what they found with that one was that the babies that used the baby walker developed a negative response to that visual cliff that we looked at last week earlier than the children that didn't get the baby walker experience. So again, the actual moving, the self-locomotion, allowed the brain to learn about depth sooner than the children that were not given the baby walker, because they weren't up and moving around yet. Right? You use baby walkers with kids who aren't crawling, creeping, walking. So this is really interesting because in the early childhood world, baby walkers have a bad name. Right? They're frowned upon now because some kids got badly hurt using baby walkers because they rolled down the stairs and fell down the stairs and knocked their heads and things like that. And so the response to children falling in baby walkers downstairs was to take the baby walker off the market, not to tell the parents that they probably should have actually been watching the child in the baby walker instead, which always seemed a little odd to me. So, this opportunity from a motor development point of view put these children quite a way ahead of children that were stationary. So developmentally, it's an interesting idea. It's just that socially, baby walkers are a no-no. And I haven't had any because I'm getting older, so my friends are past having babies, so I don't know if that's still the case, but it certainly was 10, 15 years ago, right? Let's see, then, okay, so this one is looking at the barriers. So this is an idea where I'm learning a spatial concept, okay? And so what we see is the development of this concept has a trend. If we take an infant and we give it a toy, and then you take the toy and you put it behind the curtain, do they know the toy is still there? So it takes a while. There's a learning trend here, all right? Or if I put up a barrier, if I put up a hard barrier, do they know to go around the barrier to get the toy back? Do they understand the barrier has a behind, right? So it's one of those concepts, it's so obvious as an adult, right? Of course there's a behind. If there's an in front, there has to be a behind, right? But it's obvious because we've had experience that has taught us that, not because you know that when you're born, right? So what they find is that it takes time and experience with crawling or creeping for the baby to realize it can go around the edge of the barrier to get the toy back. And then we see that it can go around the barrier when the barrier is opaque, when it isn't see-through. But when you put up a perspex, when you put up something that's clear, then they get stuck. Because now they've got mixed messages, because they can see it, but they can't touch it. And so then it takes the brain a little more time to realize that this is another form of barrier that I have to go around to get to the toy. Right? Slopes is another one. Right? How steep is the slope? If I'm creeping on my hands and knees and I get to the top of the slope, do I go down the slope head first and land on my face? Or do I turn around and go down the slope backwards? Depends how much experience at creeping you've had. So if you take them when they're just starting, they try to go down head first, not a good plan. Right? If you take a child that's just started walking, they do the same thing because the change in depth from being on my hands and knees to standing up takes some time to get used to. Right? So I've learned that if I'm creeping, I turn around and I go down backwards. But now I just stood up yesterday, and now I try to walk down the slope. Because it takes practice for your brain. All right, so affordances, the idea of an affordance is very much based in ecological perspective. Right? So you would not see the idea of an affordance if you were reading a paper that was coming from an information processing perspective, because they don't agree with this idea. Right? From an information processing perspective, my sensory organ gets that information, it sends it to the brain processes that information and sends out a motor signal and we see movement. Right? The idea of an affordance is that maybe I don't have to do that all the time. Perhaps I can see the opportunity to move within the environment without all that information having to go backwards and forwards. I don't have to cognitively analyze everything that's in the environment necessarily. All right, so it's another one of those scenarios where there's always a lot of disagreement between people who are information processing and people who are more ecologically biased. Okay? So affordances involve what the environment permits me to do. Right? Given my capabilities, what does this environment permit me to do? So if I'm at the mall, and I'm at a big enough mall that they have a second layer, right? And we get to the staircase, or in the airport, right? I get off the plane, and at the end of the little chute, there's a staircase, or a moving staircase, or a lift, right? What do? So those same opportunities are afforded to everybody, but people make different decisions, and they don't necessarily think about it. Sometimes they just make the decision based upon a kind of instinctive feel for themselves. Body scale sometimes makes a difference. So the idea that we have to body scale something. So I want to scale the equipment to the children on the playground because they haven't done a lot of growth yet. And if I give them a full-size piece of equipment, they're likely to not be successful. Even if they perceive the opportunity to move with a real tennis racket, when they try to do something, it might not be what they expected. By the same token, I wouldn't give one of the foam paddles to a 10-year-old unless they had never seen any kind of striking implement before. Right? So we see a change in capability as we grow and develop, and that changes the affordance. The perception of affordances is very individual. Right? I would look at escalator versus stairs and go, I'm going up the stairs. It's an opportunity, bless you, it's an opportunity for me to move and get some exercise. But my mum would look at the escalator and the stairs and say, that's not an opportunity to move because I can't climb those stairs. So if I want to go upstairs, I have to go on the escalator. Same environment, different perception of the opportunity it gave you to move. If the escalator wasn't there, would she go up the stairs? No. She would choose to sit downstairs and wait for me to come back. Right? So same environment, but it affords a different opportunity to different people to move. What if you go in the weight room and somebody has left 4 or 5 plates on either side of the bench press bar? Right? Does that afford you the opportunity to move? Right? I can bench the bar. I used to be able to bench 1 plate, 2 with help, 4, 5, I'm going to go do something else. Right?
Just change the environment
If I want to. Brent might walk into the gym and go, oh yeah, 4 plates on the bar, here we go. Okay? It's a different affordance, a different opportunity to move on the same environment. So, scaling sports equipment becomes very important. Right? Scaling other things in the environment, like the basketball net, becomes very important. Providing different kinds of weights in your weight room or different sizes of weights. Right? If you go into a really dedicated bodybuilding gym, you do not find those nice little pink and purple and orange little dumbbells. Right? Because that's not the population they want in their training, so they're not going to provide the opportunity to see a movement time. Stairs afford opportunities to move, and they're body scaled. Right? Now, we don't actually change the scale of the stair. Okay? So if I grow up in a house that has an upstairs, we don't change the size of the stairs as I grow up. Right? But how do you climb stairs when your legs are short? Right? So, I didn't mean that short, right? So, when you are 3, 4, 5, 6, how do you climb a steep staircase?
Crawling.
Might go on hands and knees. Do I see this?
No.
No, I might see this, right? Hold on to the railing and go up one leg at a time. As I get stronger and I get more balanced, I might go up one at a time without going sideways. I might go forwards, but I still go one leg at a time because the stair rise is very big in relation to the length of my leg. So it doesn't afford me the opportunity to go up one stair at a time. As I grow, in effect, the stair becomes more body scale, right? And at some point, I can go one leg at a time up the stairs because my legs are long enough to manage that. What happens at the other end of the lifestyle? What happens when we're 70, 80, 90?
You buy those things that you sit in and it carries you.
No, don't do that. That is bad. Right? So as we get older and we get weaker or we get less sure of our balance and our legs are not strong enough to manage that rise on the step, we go back to our 1 foot at a time action. Right? So the exact same environment afforded different opportunities to move depending upon body scale between the leg length and the rise on the step. Right. So if we deprive individuals, children or adults, of experiences where their brain can learn the connection between movement and perception, then we see delayed or deficient perceptual development. Right? And they have some human research where the deprivation occurred, obviously not by the researcher, but children were found who had been shut in cupboards, or children were made to stay in a cot even though they were 6 or 7 years old, right? And so their movement experience was very delayed, so their motor skills were delayed, but also their cognitive skills, their perceptual skills, their social skills were also delayed. Language skills, right? All of those can get delayed if you delay movement. So, movement experience influences connections in the brain. If I don't use those connections, we start to get rid of them. Okay, so if you go back a long time ago, you read an article in Lab about brain development and windows of opportunity. Remember, if we don't use those connections, then we prune them away, and then it's harder to perform that skill. Right? It gets harder to learn it. So if I can't throw or catch by the time I'm 10, 11, it's not I can't learn it, but it gets much harder. Okay, so we'll start with balance. Onward.